Today we're going to talk a little bit about what makes the 1966 Arctic Cat Panther a significant snowmobile in that brand's history. We all know that it looks much like the more common 67, 68 Panthers, of which many were produced, but this differs in a lot of ways. This is one of the first 21 Black Panthers, as they were called at the time, that was mostly hand-built by the engineering crew in Thief River Falls. I might say the very young engineering crew at that time, with 1962 only being their first year of production. Following on the successful 1966 Model 141, this Panther came along to be its replacement and carries a lot of those traits from that model, but also gives us a glimpse into what came to be on the 1967s. When taking a closer look at this snowmobile, one can see that the ski bottoms are carried over from what were common on the 1966 140s and 141s, but for the first time ever had the arched leaf spring set on there that we had not had before. The running boards themselves are unique on the 1966 Panthers. First time that we had an aluminum chassis versus the steel chassis that had been common in the years before. It was normal on the 1966 prototypes like this to not have the tail light that had become commonplace on all of the other machines. Even the rolled edge on the running board is unique between all of the Panthers. This particular one is not a full curl. Some were a full curl of a larger size, some were a full curl of a very small diameter. The 1966 Panthers like this also had a lot of variations in their dash. This one being a flat plate of aluminum that looks much like the 1967 steel dash that came along a year later. Others had arched aluminum dashes. Others had contoured aluminum dashes. The gas tanks themselves were also very unique on these, many of them being different from one another. Every gas tank was hand cut, hand welded, and each one kind of had its own design. Some were very much a trapezoidal design. This one here is more rectangular with a cutout for the steering. An open chain case was common on these. I do not believe I've ever seen a 1966 Panther with the oil bath chain case that became common on the 1967s. The engines were different on many of the 1966s. This has a 12-horse Kohler 4-stroke in it, still red in color, almost certainly carried over from one of the earlier rear-engine snowmobiles that Arctic Cat was building at the time. These black hoods on nearly all of the 1966s, although they look very much like the 1967s, are of the very same mold that the Model 140 and 141D hoods were. On that model, the gas cap was in the center of the hood, and one can look closely and see that that hole was filled in for this prototype. Windshield bands and mounting still carried over from the 1966s. Each of these hood louvers that became such a common characteristic of the 1967 and 1968 Arctic Cats were hand cut. Most of the 1966 Panthers did not have a front bumper on them. This bumper does appear that it was probably added some season after 1966. The rear backrest was unique on a 1966. This has been adapted from a slightly newer one, but the old mounting holes are still present here of where the 1966 contoured backrest was once installed. When we look underneath, there's some interesting things to note on here. The 1966s like this still utilized the aluminum idler wheels with the rubber tire, if you will, that was common on the 1966 141s. We can see the patented Arctic Cat skid frame on here in one of its earliest variations. It's easy to see where different attachments may have been moved, altered. It's also interesting to note that this skid frame, even the interior of the tunnel, has signs of red paint present on it. I'm a little bit uncertain if that's because some of this was carried over from the red and white 141 Deluxes, or if maybe for a period this soon to be released new model was going to be red in color. This machine has been fixed up, and the original engine still runs good. We run it every few winters. Always like to start it and show a little bit what this Kohler engine can still sound like. Runs as good today as it did in 1966. Pretty low RPM engine on here. We'll give this track a couple of revolutions. Might not have been dealing with the same sound emission guidelines in 1966 that we are today. This particular snowmobile we bought in the mid-1990s from a gentleman in Twin Valley, Minnesota. His family had owned it since it was nearly brand new. The Arctic Cat representative at that time in that part of the state name was Marv Manning. Well known at the time, sold a lot of Arctic Cats to dealers throughout the Midwest, and at the end of the testing season he had ended up with this and was authorized to sell it. The Cole Adkins family had it from that time forward, and in about 2002 is when my dad Wayne gave it a pretty thorough restoration. Didn't change much on it cosmetically. We had to make a new seat, but he did everything mechanical that was required to make this run and ride as good today as it did in 1966.